if you took the head of a pin and filled it with a nerve gas substance, you could kill a single human being within 3 minutes.
That stockpile sitting there represents a risk.
We have deterred use of chemical weapons against U.S. forces for some 40 years with these weapons.
It's been here forever, you know, so we're all comfortable with it.
But the probability and statistics will tell you there is a finite probability that an explosive event could happen.
We're not equipped to deal with the problem out there now.
I don't know how you get 10,000 people out of some place with 1 hour's notice.
There are going to be people die in that kind of a situation. That's all there is to it.
Five years ago this month, the United States Congress ordered the Army to get rid of its stocks of obsolete chemical weapons. Those weapons include nerve gas, and some of that nerve gas is stored here at the U.S. Army Depot at Umatilla, Oregon. The Congress originally told the Army to get rid of the weapons by 1994, but then it pushed the deadline back to 1997. And now the Army says if everything goes as planned, it should be able to burn up those chemical weapons by 1998 or 1999. But the Army admits that there's no guarantee that deadline won't be pushed back again. World War I saw the first use of poison gas, and the world reacted with horror. In 1925, the United States and other countries signed the Geneva Convention, banning the use of chemical weapons. But that didn't stop the United States from building such weapons, arguing that having the stuff on hand deters other countries from using it.
The rabbit stops breathing, and finally death occurs.
Some historians believe that U.S. stocks of poison gas stopped Hitler from using Germany's chemical weapons. However, the Japanese made use of such weapons when its troops invaded China. The United States came to this corner of Oregon in 1940 and bought almost 20,000 acres of land. The Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor was less than 10 months away when construction of the depot began. The Army brought in more than 7,000 workers and spent $35 million building 1 million square feet of warehouses, railroad tracks, and roads. Workers also built 1,000 huge bunkers known as igloos. Each contains 9 tons of concrete, 7 tons of metal. In 1962, the first nerve gas weapons arrived at the Umatilla Army Depot for storage. They remain today, tended by trained personnel in bulky protective suits. Their deterrent days have passed because today the Army's 40,000-ton stock of nerve gas weapons is obsolete and in some cases simply unusable and dangerous.
Congress has mandated that it gets no new chemical weapons, which it wants very much and which I oppose, until it cleans up 90% at least of the old weapons that are now in storage, that are antiquated, some of which are leaking.
The Army plans to begin destroying the weapons stored at Umatilla in 1996, but the Army's own experts say that those weapons are a hazard today.
The most catastrophic risk that the Army could find was not in the stockpile disposal. Rather, it was in the storage activity itself. The worst case scenarios that we could develop at very low probabilities, but nevertheless the scientists and statisticians could calculate those probabilities, was the storage accident.
Thousands of miles west of the Umatilla Depot on Johnston Atoll in the Pacific Ocean, 800 miles southwest of Hawaii, the Army spent $250 million there building a prototype nerve gas destruction plant. In this exclusive Northwest Reports documentary, we'll take you to Johnston Atoll and show you how this high-tech plant works. We'll also tell you about cost overruns, pollution concerns, and time delays the Army has run into. Delays that pose a critical problem for places such as Umatilla because chemical stabilizers in the Army's M55 nerve gas rockets are wearing out. When they do, they could explode. Most of the people we talk to here in Hermiston say they trust the United States Army and the Army's handling of the nerve gas that has been stored at the Umatilla Depot for almost 30 years. But 6 years ago, the Army commissioned a special report on its nerve gas stocks, and that report suggests there could be a problem. It said that M55 rockets stored at the depot, loaded with nerve gas agents GB and VX, could explode, and if they did, they'd release 575 pounds of the stuff, enough that this town might have to be evacuated within an hour. That report recommended that those rockets be removed immediately, but today they're still there. 10,000 people live in the northeastern Oregon town of Hermiston. Thousands more live nearby in Umatilla and McNary. The area is known for its watermelons and for wheat growing. And residents like to brag that the potatoes for 25% of McDonald's French fries come out of the huge irrigated circles that make green polka dots on this normally brown landscape.
Sawyer Brown, KO wakes you. It's 8 o'clock and a wet 44 degrees in Hermiston. Here's the latest from CBS.
KHOU program director Todd Navard moved here 7 years ago. His radio station brings music and news to people who live here. A few miles west of the radio station, the Army stores some of its most deadly weapons, rockets and bombs loaded with nerve gas.
You know, we're around it every day, and so we're more comfortable with it. I think the Portland people and people over on the other side of the state, you know, they hear about it 3 times a year. They hear about nerve gas, and everybody, oh my God, nerve gas. That's what Hussein has, you know. We have it here in Oregon. But we're pretty comfortable with it out here.
Most people in Hermiston and Umatilla share Navard's opinion of the weapons stored nearby. At one time, the depot employed thousands of residents. Many of them say that they're proud that their community has safely cared for such deadly weapons over the past 3 decades without any serious incidents. But the people who live here could find themselves under attack from the same weapons that they so carefully tended for nearly 30 years.
M55 rockets, quite frankly, are a problem. They're the oldest munitions. They are thin-skinned aluminum.
The corrosive nerve gas contained in the rockets has been eating away at that thin skin over the years. In the Umatilla Depot's high-security K block, the Army has discovered more than 400 leaking nerve gas weapons in that time. But that's not the only problem posed by M55 rockets.
There are stabilizers in there to maintain it safely over its useful life in the stockpile.
Brigadier General Walter Busby has been given the job of disposing of the Army's nerve gas rockets before the stabilizer in the solid fuel rocket motor gets so old that it spontaneously ignites or explodes.
That stabilizer degrades over age. All the data I have seen indicates that that stabilizer content is adequate to assure safe storage of those munitions anywhere from 10 to 20 years in the future.
But the Army's acknowledged expert on rockets has a more conservative estimate of stabilizer life.
We run tests. We know we've got storage life left. Our projection is at least 10 more years of storage life.
The Army stores thousands of M55 nerve gas rockets at the Umatilla Depot, and it doesn't plan to begin destroying them until 1996, 6 years into that 10-year safety period. And the Army's destruction program is now running behind schedule. A report written 6 years ago at the request of the Army warns that the failure of a stabilizer could lead to the explosion of a rocket. Released under the Freedom of Information Act, the National Research Council report says an explosion in an igloo containing rockets might ignite many of them, with the estimated release of 575 pounds of nerve gas that could very well jeopardize Umatilla and Hermiston. 3,000 people live in the town of Umatilla, 5.5 miles northeast of the depot. 10,000 live in Hermiston, 6.25 miles due east. And 15,000 people live in Pendleton, 33 miles southeast of the nerve gas. The report goes on to say there could be less than an hour to warn and evacuate a population of 10,000 if casualties were to be avoided.
Generating the capacity to move 10,000 people, and that's in town, and there's 30,000 people down here in the West End, so I'm saying that you probably have to move 15,000 people, and you suggest to me that you can move 15,000 people in 1 hour, and I'm going to suggest that you'd better have some halos spinning around your head, because you're not going to get that job done. You're just not going to do it. There are going to be people die in that kind of a situation. That's all there is to it.
Oregon Congressman Les Aucoin charges that the Army has not considered the worst-case scenarios for the 8 sites where nerve gas weapons are stored and where weapons incinerators are slated to be built. the very same scenarios outlined in a report written for the Army 6 years ago.
I read that report, Lars, very carefully, and I think that they identified something the Army once again chose to ignore or not to investigate.
The 1984 report recommended that the Army immediately move the M55 rockets away from Umatilla if it could not destroy them quickly. Today, the rockets are still there, and aging stabilizers in the rocket propellant make them even more dangerous than they were 6 years ago. The Army hopes to begin destroying them 6 years from now. Back in 1969 and 1970, the Army announced it had plans to ship nerve gas from Okinawa to the Umatilla Army Depot in northeastern Oregon. Local residents said they weren't worried about it. There'd been nerve gas here since 1962. But the governor of the state, Tom McCall, and many Northwest residents fought the plan. They said it was a bad idea. So the Army acquiesced and shipped the gas instead to a tiny spot in the middle of the Pacific Ocean called Johnston Atoll. Ironically, that's where the Army has now built the first full-scale nerve gas destruction plant, the same kind of plant that the Army plans to build here at Umatilla within the next 2 years. This tiny chunk of coral, 2 miles long and half a mile wide, called Johnston Atoll, is surrounded by an ocean called the Pacific. The name means peace, which is an irony, since the United States Army has stacked tons of the most deadly weapons of war on Johnston Atoll.
We have the M23 landmine, the 105 millimeter artillery projectile, the M55 rocket. This is the 4.2-inch mortar round, the 500-pound Mark 94 bomb.
The technology for destruction of the Army's nerve gas was developed on Johnston Atoll. The plant behind me cost $250 million to build. It's the model for the 8 other plants planned to be built in the continental United States, including the one at Umatilla. If everything works the way the Army has it planned, nerve gas will go in one end, and clean air and carbon dioxide will go out the other end.
We feel we have a technology that's safe.
Civilian Charlie Baronian has worked for the Army on chemical weapons technology for 20 years. Until 1970, the Army used ocean dumping to get rid of chemical weapons. Retired ships carried the weapons to a deep part of the ocean. The military even had an acronym for this process: CHASE, for cut holes and sink 'em. Congress banned ocean dumping in 1972. The Army has considered putting the stuff in a hole and setting off a nuclear blast, but decided the political problems of that solution were simply too great to overcome. It experimented with chemical neutralization, but found that although it works, the process creates 5 pounds of toxic waste for each pound of nerve gas destroyed. Scientists decided that high-temperature incineration was the best method, but then the question was, where to do it? U.S. chemical weapons were scattered around the planet, from Germany to Johnston Atoll, and 8 sites across the continental United States. Further studies showed the Army stood a good chance of killing a lot of people if it tried to move 40,000 tons of nerve and mustard gas to a central disposal site. So the decision was made to build 9 destruction plants around the country, including one at the Umatilla Army Depot. The Army wants to prove its technology at Johnston Island, 800 miles from the nearest population center, before it builds plants in the United States. The Johnston Island plant began working in June, and by November 1st had destroyed more than 3,000 of the Army's hundreds of thousands of rockets. The plant is known as JCADS, for Johnston Atoll Chemical Agent Disposal System.
This is the bunker we're currently issuing out to JCADS. These rockets that you see in front of you will be scheduled for destruction in JCADS within the next few weeks.
M55 rockets represent the greatest risk, according to the Army, so they get first priority. Workers in protective gear load rockets into steel containers. The containers are then taken to the destruction plant and unloaded. One at a time, the rockets ride a conveyor into an explosion-proof room where a hole is punched and the nerve gas, actually a liquid, is drained into a tank. A shear cuts the rocket into 8 sections. An incinerator cooks the pieces at 2,700 degrees for more than 15 minutes, long enough to destroy all remaining nerve gas traces. A second incinerator burns the liquid nerve gas drained from the rocket. A third incinerator burns explosive parts removed from munitions. And a fourth furnace burns wooden pallets, used protective clothing, and other waste. All of the incinerator exhaust and building air is scrubbed by a sophisticated filter system before being released. The Army says it removes 99.999999, that's 6/9% of all pollutants. If sensors detect any nerve gas, the filter is shut down and a fresh one is used. Monitors analyze 35,000 air samples each day, testing for nerve gas around the plant. Workers express confidence in the system.
Well, at first it was a little bit spooky, but now that we've got the hang of it, it seems like it's going to be all right.
Process operator Sam Connerly believes people who live near the nerve gas plants the Army plans to build have no reason to worry.
I think if it's run like it is here, they'll be okay. I think it'll be all right. It needs to be done, and we need to take care of it like we've been doing now.
Stan Moore worked in the nuclear weapons plants near the Tri-Cities in Washington State before he came to Johnston Atoll.
I think the first time I went in for training, I was a little bit apprehensive, but once I've had my 8 hours of training, and since I've been in a toxic area, I feel very comfortable about it.
Ground has already been broken at the Tooele Army Base in Utah for a JCADS-type plant, and Army officials say they trust the technology.
If I did not have confidence in that from actual experience, then I certainly wouldn't be living right next to the plant as we are in Tooele. And when I say we, I'm talking about my family, myself.
In August, a congressional delegation visited Johnston Island to look at the plant and came away satisfied.
I came here with a few doubts, but I leave here reinforced in my support of this facility.
I'm absolutely convinced that this facility is as good as you can possibly make it to do the job it's attempting to do, and I'm convinced that it can do it and do it well. No health hazards, environmentally sound.
Despite that, the plant on Johnston Island is running far behind schedule and over cost. That plant serves as the model for those the Army plans to build in the United States, and it is the plant needed to destroy the Army's chemical weapons before they wear out or blow up on their own.
These are some of the M55 rockets stored on Johnston Island in the Pacific. They contain nerve gas, and they are some of the most dangerous munitions that the Army is handling. They're the same kind of M55 rockets stored in northeastern Oregon at the Umatilla Depot, the rockets that the Army plans to destroy in the late 1990s.
The Army spent $250 million building this plant to safely destroy M55 rockets as well as other obsolete nerve gas bombs and landmines. Congress ordered the Army to get rid of the weapons by 1994, but that deadline has been pushed back twice. The Army pinned its hopes on a sophisticated incinerator, which hasn't worked right.
We've run into mechanical problems with the plant.
The Army's acknowledged expert, Charlie Baronian, says the plant works well when it works.
Basically, the plant should have been operating at this point in its evolution somewhere around 70% of the time. It's operating at about half of that right now, so about 35% of the time.
The Army admits that since the plant went online in June, it has operated for only 20 of the 85 days when it was scheduled to run. The 10 o'clock news took these pictures in mid-October at the Army's Johnston Atoll base in the Pacific Ocean southwest of Hawaii. By the time you see them, these rockets, nearly 2,000 of them, will probably have already been destroyed. But there are thousands more just like them. The Army hopes to finish destroying all of the weapons on Johnston Island in 3 years. That forecast depends on the speed the plant was supposed to operate, not the way it has actually run. The delays might not be a problem if the Army had the luxury of simply storing the weapons for a longer time. But these weapons are old.
These were made in '64, I believe.
Worker Sam Connerly handles M55 rockets. He loads them into the machinery, which eventually destroys them.
They're old, like you say, and they're brittle with age, you know, and they could be deteriorating inside, and it does a little bit of concern about them.
In fact, the corrosive nerve gas in the rocket nose cone has been eating away at the aluminum skin for 25 years or more. More than 400 leaking weapons have been detected and sealed at the Umatilla Army Depot in Oregon in the nearly 30 years they've been stored there. If a single rocket at the Umatilla Depot self-ignites, an Army report predicts an explosion that would free a cloud of nerve gas that could force the evacuation of thousands of people from the Hermiston and Umatilla areas. In 18 years of nerve gas work on Johnston Atoll, the Army says there's never been a serious accident. However, everyone on the island has gas masks and nerve gas antidote syringes within arm's reach.
This is a positive overpressure building. Everything blows out toward the streets.
The Army built a special safe haven on the island where workers can flee if there's a leak. and special precautions are taken.
The wind is our first defense. We do not move chemical rounds on Johnston Island when the wind is not blowing as it is today.
On Johnston Island, the Army located chemical weapons storage igloos so that they would usually be downwind from where people live. Cities near the Umatilla Army Depot lack that advantage. The National Weather Service says the wind usually blows from the depot toward Hermiston, Umatilla, McNary, and Pendleton. The Army trains and equips military personnel to handle chemical emergencies at the depot, but the military has no police power off the base.
Are your officers equipped with gas masks?
No.
Were they at one time?
We were at one time.
Hermiston Police Chief Bob Shannon believes an accident, in his words, will never happen at the depot.
Do you think that you and your officers are equipped to handle an emergency if there was one at the depot?
No, and I say that without even a question in my mind. We're not equipped to deal with the problem out there now. We're not properly clothed for that. We're not properly trained for that.
The Federal Emergency Management Agency plans to install special radios costing hundreds of dollars each in about 3,000 homes around the depot. But there's a hitch.
The current criteria is written to have a radio with a 7-year battery life, and there is no radio on the market today with that type of battery life.
Umatilla County's draft emergency plan includes announcements to be read on radio stations if there is an accident. One such announcement advises people to evacuate with their car windows rolled up and towels held over their noses.
Would you stick around to read it?
Yeah, I guess so. You know, theoretically, we're ready to do that now. We're all prepared. We have a whole setup, and we go through about every 3 months. We do a test run just between us and the depot, so we're ready to go with it if it happens. Hypothetically, would we run? I don't think so. I don't think it would be worth the effort, really, to run. Wind's usually blowing from there to here anyway, so I don't think it would really matter. Couldn't drive fast enough.
Like many who live in Hermiston, Todd Navard believes accidents simply won't happen at the depot. The Army schedule calls for ground to be broken at Umatilla in mid-1992 for construction of a Johnston Atoll-type nerve gas destruction plant.
Now, the cost of the incinerator alone is more than $80 million. Building it, running it for a few years, then taking it apart and taking it away, well, that's estimated to cost more than $550 million, and the Army says there's no guarantee that that cost estimate won't rise in the next few years. Perhaps the most troubling aspect of the Army's operation here in decontaminating this nerve gas is whether or not it'll remove that incinerator. The Congress passed a law that says the incinerator must be removed, but the Congress has now ordered the Army to study the possibility of leaving it here to save money.
In 1969, tons of chemical weapons owned by the United States military remained in Okinawa. Japan wanted it out, and the United States agreed to move it, spurred on by a minor accident that injured 24 U.S. servicemen, according to news accounts at the time. The Army planned to ship it to the Umatilla Army Depot in Oregon, where thousands of tons of the stuff was already stored. But a firestorm of opposition, notably from Washington Senators Henry Scoop Jackson and Warren Magnuson, sent the weapons to Johnston Atoll instead. 20 years ago, the Army argued that having chemical weapons around kept other countries from using their chemical weapons. Today, the Army says the same thing.
My personal opinion is that we have deterred use of chemical weapons against U.S. forces for some 40 years with these weapons, and in my view, that's a good objective. And yes, it's going to be expensive to dispose of them. All disarmament efforts are very expensive.
But a secret document written more than 20 years ago by Army Undersecretary Thaddeus Beale belies General Busby's statements last month. Referring to the weapons on Johnston Atoll, the memo to the Deputy Secretary of Defense says, quote, "It appears that the nerve agent rockets can be destroyed without serious effect on our deterrent capability. The memo recommends so-called demilitarization of the rockets once the necessary facilities are constructed." But the Army waited until the mid-1980s to begin building demilitarization facilities on Johnston Atoll for the weapons that the memo refers to.
What you're dealing with is 25, 30, 40 maybe years of benign neglect.
House Defense Appropriations Committee member Les Aucoin faults the Army for failing to dispose of the weapons sooner. Aucoin suggests that the Army is now motivated by a congressional mandate to get rid of the old weapons before new ones can be built.
So they're hell-bent to get this stuff cleaned up so they can get all this new stuff.
General Busby admits that the Army originally planned to build new so-called binary nerve gas weapons as the old weapons were destroyed.
And binary munition modernization did begin. The U.S. has announced it is ceasing production of binary munitions, but the law is still on the books that says proceed with the total destruction of the U.S. stockpile.
Environmental groups such as Greenpeace have expressed concerns about pollution from the nerve gas destruction plants. But the Army says its initial results from the Johnston Island plant show it does not pollute. However, it does produce tons of hazardous waste which must be disposed of in a landfill. The Army hasn't put the contract out to bid for hazardous waste disposal from the Umatilla plant yet, but the only approved hazardous waste landfill in the Pacific Northwest is located in Arlington, Oregon, just west of the Umatilla depot. The Army plans to build its nerve gas destruction plant in Oregon starting in June of 1992 and begin burning nerve gas in 1996, finishing in 1998. Now, that schedule is subject to change, according to the Army. But what happens to the plant when the job is done?
The public law mandates that the facilities be cleaned up, closed, and dismantled at the end of their useful service life.
The incinerators cost billions of dollars, and the Congress has ordered the Army to study the idea of not destroying the plants when the nerve gas is gone.
I'd like to see it stay. I know the people of Umatilla County would like to see it stay.
Congressman Les Aucoin sees economic development potential in an incinerator which can burn hazardous waste. Even if the Army decides to tear down the incinerator at Umatilla, General Busby says the job probably won't be done until after the year 2000.
About 6% of the United States chemical stocks are stored here on Johnston Atoll. It'll take more than 3 years to burn it all up, and when that job is done, the job at Umatilla, Oregon will just be beginning. The estimated cost of burning up all of this country's chemical stocks, $5 billion, and there's no guarantee that price won't increase. It's also going to take the better part of this decade, 2 or perhaps past the year 2000, to do the whole job. On Johnston Atoll, with photographer Gordon Coffin, Lars Larson, the 10 o'clock news.